Hello, everyone, and welcome to In Focus on UATV. Exactly 4 years ago today, Russia launched its full-scale invasion, promising to take Kyiv in 3 days. Some partners said Ukraine wouldn't last a few weeks. Here we are, standing tall, holding firm against the so-called second army in the world, now propped up by North Korean soldiers, Iranian drones, and Chinese money. The front has barely moved in years. Russia crawls forward by millimeters, losing hundreds of thousands in senseless fights over tree lines and fields. Ukraine didn't just survive. We stabilized the line, struck back deep into Russian territory, and keep dismantling their military and economic machine. Victory belongs to us because we fight with purpose, while their empire crumbles under its own weight. Kremlin puppets in Europe like Orban and Fico will fail. Truth always wins in the end. Stay with us. Kyiv's sharp response to blackmail from Budapest and Bratislava, and how the West is turning the war unwinnable for Russia through sanctions, aid, and resolve. Let's go.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
On the anniversary of invasion, Slovakia's Robert Fico and Hungary's Viktor Orban issued ultimatums, threatening to cut emergency electricity to Ukraine unless we resume Russian oil transit through the Druzhba pipeline they know is damaged by Russian strikes on January 27th. Kyiv's answer is clear. Send your demands to Moscow, not us. We've proposed alternatives like the Odessa-Brody route, but they prefer provocation over solutions. This is election season theater from Kremlin allies. Watch how Ukraine calls it out and stands firm against pressure that only exposes their dependence and desperation.
Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico stated on 21st February that he is ready to halt emergency electricity supplies to Ukraine from 23rd February unless Kyiv resumes transit of Russian oil via the Druzhba pipeline. On the same day, Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban made a similar statement.
This no longer concerns economics, nor does it concern pan-European rules within the same EU framework. In my personal opinion, this is a provocation that was planned by the Russian Federation during the attack on January 27th. And what is happening now is a clear scenario that, in fact, complements the subsequent massive attacks.
Supplies of Russian oil to Slovakia and Hungary via the Druzhba pipeline stopped after 27th January. That day, the Russian army struck the section of the pipeline passing through Ukrainian territory. The fire at the facility was extinguished over several days, but in Bratislava and Budapest, Moscow is not held responsible for the accident. Instead, they prefer to blame Ukraine for allegedly deliberately not repairing the pipeline damaged by the Russian strike. The governments of Slovakia and Hungary declared a state of emergency in the oil products market in their countries. Political opponents of Robert Fico called the statement about possibly halting electricity supplies to Ukraine a moral failure and an economic absurdity. They urged the government to seriously engage in diversifying oil supplies.
Fico is once again acting to Moscow's benefit and harming Ukraine during a harsh winter and attacks on energy infrastructure. This is not about oil. It is a disgrace for Slovakia. We will lose money for electricity, lose trust in the EU, and show the world that we are again on the wrong side of history. He does not want to help neighbors. He only wants to harm them. This is not politics. It is a betrayal. Branislav Groling, chairman of Freedom and Solidarity Party, in an interview with Denik N.
Members of the Slovak parliament stated that Prime Minister Fico is driving the entire country into a trap. It is obvious that if Ukraine has no electricity to repair infrastructure, it will not be able to restore the damaged Druzhba pipeline. Budapest will block the European Union's adoption of the 20th sanctions package against Russia because Ukraine is allegedly deliberately not repairing the Druzhba pipeline, promised Hungarian Foreign Minister Péter Szijjártó. And Viktor Orban confirmed at a pre-election rally Hungary's intention to block aid to Kyiv. According to him, it is Ukraine's actions that have supposedly created risks for the country's energy supply. Orban preferred not to mention that the pipeline was damaged by a Russian strike.
We clearly stated that as long as oil supplies from Ukraine do not resume, these $90 billion will never, not in millions of years, reach Ukraine. That's how it is.
Ukraine's Ministry of Foreign Affairs condemned the ultimatums and blackmail from Hungary and Slovakia.
We have also provided information about the consequences of these Russian attacks on the Druzhba oil pipeline infrastructure to the governments of Hungary and Slovakia. Security and stabilization repair work continues amid daily threats of new missile attacks. Ukraine has also proposed alternative ways to resolve the issue of supplying non-Russian oil to these countries. We call on the governments of Hungary and the Slovak Republic to engage in constructive cooperation and behave responsibly. Ultimatums should be sent to the Kremlin, and certainly not to Kyiv, from a statement by Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine on the ministry's website.
Polish Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski stated that he is outraged, but not surprised by Hungary's decision to block EU financial aid to Ukraine. The diplomat noted that Orbán will, quote, apparently be thanked by Putin. Hungary opposes Ukraine's accession to the European Union and opposes any aid to Ukraine. Now the anti-Ukrainian rhetoric of the government has intensified ahead of the elections, analysts explain.
Hungary would most likely have voted against this money anyway and blocked it. But here the situation is complicated by the elections in Hungary in April. Orbán plans to be re-elected. Therefore, the situation is really very difficult. As always, Putin is to blame, because his troops bombed the Druzhba pipeline. But besides that, there are many aggravating factors.
Ukraine has proposed using other elements of its infrastructure, in particular the Odessa-Brody pipeline, for fuel transit to Hungary and Slovakia, instead of the Druzhba pipeline damaged by the Russian attack. It also suggested considering a combined route with sea transportation and subsequent land delivery via existing lines. Reported by Natalia Husak, UATV News.
And while Kremlin proxies play games, the free world keeps turning up the heat. The EU pushes the 20th sanctions package. NATO allies deliver billions in weapons, and leaders make it plain. Russia isn't winning. It's bleeding, slow and weak. With Ukraine's EU path open, military aid flowing, and costs mounting daily, the aggressor faces no path to victory, only rising losses and isolation. See how consistent pressure, smart support, and political will are forcing Moscow toward the table on our terms.
In the European Union, they are convinced Russia is not inclined towards serious negotiations to end the war against Ukraine. This is evidenced by the Russian army's constant strikes on Ukrainian cities, stated the European Commission.
As long as the bloodshed continues, we will continue to put pressure on Russia. Sanctions have a double effect of limiting Russia's capability to wage war against Ukraine and at the same time to push Putin to come to the negotiating table. Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine involves clearly a victim and an aggressor, and Europe will continue to maintain this pressure until we have a just and lasting peace for Ukraine.
From Brussels' perspective, the strategic step should be Ukraine's integration into the European Union. This means long-term financial support, economic recovery, strengthened defense capabilities, and anchoring Ukraine in the Western political economic system. Combined with sanctions, military aid to Kyiv, and international isolation of Moscow, this creates a situation in which continuing the war will bring no strategic dividends to the aggressor, only increasing costs.
What I can say is indeed the discussions that you're referring to relate to the ongoing peace talks, and in this context, EU accession of Ukraine to the EU is indeed being discussed. But we cannot at this stage really prejudge the outcome of these discussions. What I can say is that indeed EU integration can contribute to our common objective, meaning securing peace and prosperity to Ukraine.
The West can make it so that for Russia, the war against Ukraine never ends in victory. All that is needed is political will, writes The Telegraph. Over 4 years of full-scale war against Ukraine, the Russian army has failed to achieve its goals, but has suffered losses that, according to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, already exceed 1,258,000 people. And in the last 2 months alone, the aggressor country has lost more people than it has managed to mobilize.
It took the Soviet Union just under 4 years to resist, expel, and defeat Hitler's forces and regime. In November 1941, the Germans almost reached Moscow. By May 1945, the Russians had captured Berlin. All that in less time than Russia has now taken to occupy about 20% of Ukraine, even when you include previously occupied Crimea, from a publication by The Telegraph.
It is the aggressor that must make concessions when concluding a peace agreement, Vice President of the European Commission Kaja Kallas is convinced. According to her, the Geneva talks once again showed that Russia is not backing away from its maximalist demands. Putin is dragging out the negotiations rather than striving for peace.
Next Monday, we aim to adopt the 20th sanctions package against Russia. Sanctions are working, they are severely hurting Russia's economy, and each new measure further limits its ability to wage the war. Moscow is not invincible. Its army is suffering record casualties, and its economy is under heavy strain. But Putin won't end this war until the costs are higher than the benefits, and that is the point we must reach.
German Chancellor compared Russians to Nazis because they literally conduct, quote, Nazi propaganda against Ukraine. Friedrich Merz stated, "It is time for Europe to learn to speak to Moscow in the language of strength." EU countries continue to increase defense budgets. Representatives of Germany, France, Poland, Italy, and the United Kingdom reported.
As Europe's leading defence powers, we're taking responsibility for our own security, developing low-cost air weapons to keep our people and our nations safe. Our first project will use cutting-edge technologies, learning the lessons from the battlefield in Ukraine, and at a time of increasing threats, it's actions, not words, that will deter Putin.
Thus, the West is making it clear. The key to peace lies not in concessions to the aggressor, but in consistent strengthening of pressure. Sanctions against Russia, military support for Ukraine, and the prospect of its EU membership can change Moscow's strategic plans, analysts believe. The West is betting that with sufficient political will, the Kremlin can be compelled to real negotiations for a just and sustainable peace. Reported by Natalia Husak, Volodymyr Shtenhalov, UATV News.
That's today's In Focus on this solemn anniversary. 4 years of standing unbroken. Russia promised quick victory and got stalemate, massive losses, and a cracking economy. Ukraine fights with clarity, strikes deep, rebuilds faster than they can destroy, and draws real allies who see our strength. The truth prevails. Our resolve outlasts their aggression, and victory is coming. Thank you for watching. If you value unfiltered truth from the front lines of freedom, hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and share this with friends who stand for what's right. Together, we win. See you next time. Stay focused, stay unbreakable. Slava Ukraini. Heroyam Slava.